episode of Coffee with Gable. I'm extremely excited to have Tamar Draper Mahru here with me. Tamar is VP of Global Real Estate and Workplace in Twilio. So, if you can, Tamar, introduce yourself a little bit about your background, anything that you would like to share as we start.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this. I know it's going to be a fun time talking with you about all things workplace today. And hello to everybody who's joined in. As Lisa said, I work for Twilio, which you might be familiar with, but if you're not, Twilio is essentially an API powerhouse, but even more so, we truly power communications of companies so that they can reach their customers. So a single engagement platform for customer success is what we do. And if you use Uber or Airbnb, DoorDash, any of those types of applications, you're using Twilio's technology.
Twilio.
So just to give you an idea in case you've never really heard of us. So at Twilio, I'm the vice president of real estate and workplace, have been there for just about 4 years. And so have seen not just an incredible amount of growth, but obviously for all of us to have gone through the pandemic for at least half of that time, it's really been an interesting shift that we've had to make from a real estate and workplace standpoint. And then prior to Twilio, I spent just about 4 years at Zendesk, another sort of customer focused sort of platform located in San Francisco. And then prior to Zendesk, similar fashion, I was the head of facilities and real estate at Airbnb for about 2.5 years, a little bit more than 2.5 years. So I've got, a lot of workplace related experience, but also in really high growth tech companies over the past 10 years or so.
Amazing. You are my idol. It's amazing. So a few things. Let's kick kick this session with, I would say, just a general question from your vast experience. What makes, I would say, um, what are the fundamentals in a sense of an excellent workplace? Or things that you've seen that has changed or progressed over the years, and things that are, regardless of COVID or not, you see as fundamentals that companies should have in terms of their workplace experience teams.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think that there's something that really encapsulates, at least for me, the shift that has happened. And that is, prior, I think, even in the evolution to getting towards using the word workplace, because we used facilities quite a bit,
Yep.
we've moved from a facility slash sort of physical site related experience and do all of the things for that site and move really towards a more person centric perspective. And for my teams currently and over the past few years, is truly about customer obsession. So in order to
Powerful.
deliver an experience that makes sense, that makes people feel good, that hits all of the goals and priorities that we have as a company, et cetera, we have to actually understand who we're delivering to and understand that in the evolution, particularly over the past few years, that there's something different for everybody. There are different, probably a lot more archetypes of internal customers than there ever were before. And so I think that
Yes.
that's really the challenge, right? That's kind of what we are trying to figure out now, and why companies are having a bit of a challenging time is because we're kind of doing it from scratch in a way. But
I
the
agree.
only way that we can continue to evolve in a really good way is if we understand our customer, and that customer is internal employees, and
Exactly.
whatever their needs are. And I'm not saying that that wasn't there before, but it's really just a shift in perspective, right? Rather than delivering services, how are we actually creating experiences where people feel like they are included, like they belong, like they have place, they have purpose, and that we're able to do that consistently.
Yeah. So one, I love it, and I think it's a really common thread that I also hear. It's one is move from the word facilities in a sense to workplace experience. It is and effectively serving, like, in a sense, you're building a product for your customers, who are, in a sense, the most important asset of the company, that are the employees, and you want to make sure that you provide a product that works for them. And I think it's a very unique way of looking at that, because it's no longer, in a sense, you have an office, you go to an office, and let's hope that there is like the best office there is, and that's it, and you're done. In a sense, it's a much more complex solution that needs to be made, I would say. So I think that one of the things that I want to talk about is basically your open work policy that you've now launched in Twilio. I would love just a little bit to understand, what does it mean? Where did it come from? Like, I assume that there was a lot of serving your customers and like understanding. So I would love to hear just the process a little bit, and like what does it entail, and maybe finally what are the outputs that you are seeing and results.
Yeah. It has been, when the pandemic started in March of 2020. And I think even though it hadn't been called open work yet, it was called WOW, or ways of working. But we started that conversation in, I'm going to say July, when it was really evident that things were not going to be the same. That, remember, like, it was going to be 2 weeks. We were all going to be gone, and then we were going to come back to our offices. And that like never materialized. It took more than 2 years, actually. But we started the conversation of ways of working, which eventually became open work, I want to say back in July of 2020. And so there was this cross-functional effort that included real estate and workplace, HR, IT, members of the executive team, just as like, let's start talking about this, right? It wasn't formal at that point. We were just getting ideas out on paper, and we were connecting with a whole host of different types of companies, different size companies, competitors on different sort of factors for the business that we do, and just engaging in lots of conversation, right? That's how this all started. And so fast forward sort of through the pandemic to kind of where we are today, it became open work. And we truly solidified it for Twilio that what we wanted to put forward was this idea of being remote first. We were sort of dancing around hybrid. We knew that we weren't going to require people to come back to the office like many companies have done. And you've seen sort of the results of that mixed in terms of results, right? Not really probably as successful as those companies would have imagined. And we decided early on that we weren't going to do that. And honestly, when you think about it, when we were going to work before, your office didn't have to tell you to come. So why would we tell people that on the other end? Like, it just didn't make any sense. And so for open work, what we decided is that our solutions would try to essentially solve for the remote experience as a cornerstone, because we already knew how to solve for the in-person experience, because we've been doing it for years, right? The difference was that, how do we get the same level or equitable levels of engagement and availability for people to feel like they belong, that they're a part of the company, that they're connected, but from a remote perspective. And that's really what open work is about. It's us solving for, how is it that we ensure, knowing that at least for the foreseeable future, I'll say that I'm saying for the next 18 to 24 months, we'll see what happens. But for the foreseeable future, that a lot of people are not going to be coming into physical locations that are offices. We think that's okay, right? So first off, we think it's okay that people aren't coming in just sort of every day, day in, day out, commuting in, getting some work done, going into meetings, and then going home.
Which is a statement of its own, right? In a sense,
which is a statement in its own. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that where it is that we sort of fuel out of all of our energy right now under open work is figuring out what experiences various employees are having, so that we can figure out how to make those equitable, but also keeping in mind that we're not saying that you need to be in a specific place in order to have the richest experience possible. So you can come to offices, and what we say is that offices are meant for purposeful gatherings and events. Well, just as an example, one of the things that we're talking about is, okay, what is purposeful? Does purposeful mean business?
A lot
Does
of
it
things.
mean
Yeah.
social? Is it both? Because then if we understand those definitions, and that's really what we have to do as a part of all of this, is when we say something, what's the definition behind it? And then how does it get applied throughout the business? And is everybody using that definition and that word in the same way? Because what we're finding is that people aren't. And so what happens is that different teams are kind of doing the same thing, but they don't know what the other team is working on. Even though if we collaborated and sort of understood, hey, what's your definition of equity? How are you using that for your programs? This is what we're doing. And we're trying to really coalesce all of those things so that we have greater focus in the areas that need the greatest attention, again, in creating that equitable experience across all our employees.
I think this is a really, really important point. I would say that probably number one thing that we hear is how to make, the time that you come together meaningful, right? Because in a
Mhm.
sense, people almost all, it depends. If you live in a tiny apartment in New York and you have roommates and things like that, probably you will go just to have, a solo work environment, or that basically if your home environment is not suitable, it's a different use case than that you are describing, which is basically how do we make people feel connected even though they don't have to come to the company office or an office, but we want to provide some, in a sense, physical experience, or like what are the guidelines in a sense
Mhm.
of gathering. Um, and I see this as a challenge from, I would say, almost every company that we partner with, in a sense, because it is very hard to define some rules when it's also distributed.
Mhm.
And teams are, and especially at scale, right? So
Oh, for
teams
sure.
are, those are different business units. How do you share information? How do you do all of those things? So I'm wondering, how do you, let's say specifically on the vertical of people collaborating and meeting together, what have you found as a policy or things that, you're aiming towards for making this connection and collaboration in place?
Yeah. First, before I answer that, at Twilio, only 17% of our managers are co-located to their team. So,
Wow.
one
Wow.
of the things that we are doing, and this is in direct response to this question, is we're calling it teaming at. So teaming at Twilio. And what
Okay.
we are doing is sort of training leaders, managers, et cetera, on this idea of understanding what do we mean when we say team? Because there are a bunch of different types of teams, right?
Correct.
I have a team, let's say my leadership team, like those of us that are part of real estate and workplace and are responsible for strategizing and leading the team. I'm also in the broader team of real estate and workplace. I'm on the executive team. I'm on an operating team for open work. So I'm a part, as are many employees, a part of a number of different teams. So when we
Yes.
say teaming at and how we make those connections, it's vector rich. Like there's a bunch of different ways you can
Correct.
go. And
Mhm.
so we launched Teaming At and are currently in the process for the rest of this year, helping teams create charters for their teams. So not policies that come from sort of on high within our organization, but really having teams say, okay, this is what we mean when we talk about getting together. This is what's important to us. The ideal outcome is that we are somehow able to aggregate all of these team charters in a way that then, and it's lofty and very aspirational, but I do think that it's possible, is then understand, okay, for all of the teams that have been identified, where do they cross pollinate? And where they cross pollinate, how can we actually enable those teams who are not in the same location, right? Because again, we're very distributed, but they
Yep.
have the same goals and they're working on the same things in a way that has them connected across the various teams that they work on. It's a lot of
Mhm.
work. I'll be very honest with you. But we really think that the success in it is making those matches, because what we're not seeing is that teams are making those matches themselves. Not
Yes.
entirely. Some are better than others, but we want something that's a bit more holistic and spread throughout the organization so that we're all operating in the same way. And the workshops that we're doing and the trainings that we're doing is teaching teams how to think about it. And so if we're saying that over and over and over to various teams, then we're hopeful that people are on the same page. But we think it's truly in empowering teams to figure out how it is that they want to get together. And then what we will do is take that information and best enable that to happen.
Amazing. So basically, I really like the intentionality of it, and I completely agree that there are multiple teams. Basically, you have your core team, and there are verticals or horizontal, like V teams, in a sense, that you're part of, that you want and you need to collaborate with them in different contexts, in a sense, right?
Right.
Whether this is, um, so I completely agree, and I wonder how in general, what do you see in as challenges on creating these togetherness in a sense? Or in general, what have you seen in terms of challenges that are arising in implementing such policies?
Yeah, so I would say that there's two things, and we could
Yeah.
probably all understand what these two things are and that we've experienced them. The first is behavior. You can't policy
How do you
behavior.
change behavior? Yeah.
You can't. You can, like you can, but not from telling people the way they should behave, right? It's more about enablement. And then the second thing is general change management. I
Okay.
think if you can't figure out the best way to make a change stick, then you did all this work for nothing. So, as a part of sort of ideating these programs and figuring out how it is that we're going to help people, it also has to be understanding what does the journey look like along the way that we're communicating, that we're saying at this particular juncture, this is what we'd like to see, this is what we think success is going to look like. It's almost like any sort of project that you've got. There are success factors along the way.
Sure.
And the same thing is true of change management. But I think the very first thing is that it starts with you can't policy behavior. We're humans. And so humans, depending on whatever it is that's going on with them on that particular day or that particular week or the things that they're working on, they're going to feel differently about certain things. And that
Agree.
impacts the way that they show up. And so it has to be that taking out or at least understanding the human behavioral component and realizing that no matter what it is that you think is going to happen, it's probably going to go in a completely different direction. And just being okay with that, like, is key. Like being able to be adaptable to the result
Adaptable and
being
resilient. Yeah,
different
for sure.
than you expected is really where we are. We're trying our best to sort of unlearn the habit that what we say is what people will do.
And I wonder, based on your experience, like, have you seen things that have surprised you in terms of now that, people are distributed? What are the, I would say, spontaneous behaviors that you've seen that helped or you didn't like, I would say. But I wonder if you've seen some things that surprised you in terms of what is exactly to the point that you mentioned, like being comfortable with the fact that it's not gonna work probably the way you assume.
One of the biggest things that I am surprised at, the things that motivated people to be in an office, they do not care about today. So we used to talk about, all of the various perks, right, that would happen at the
Yeah.
offices. And we would bring things to people. Going back to what I was saying earlier, you come to the office, we will bring everything to you. People don't really care about that at all anymore. And so it actually begs the question now. It's like, well, how deep do we go into our revised food program? How much do we look at these other perks? Because it's not like people are asking for them. The things that
Amazing.
that come up over and over and over again are just about how can I see my team? How can I connect, socialize, and be in person when it matters the most? And that I think is really, really interesting. The priority for people is other people at the moment.
Wow.
And policies don't usually solve for that. They solve for what you have to do, they solve for process, they don't necessarily solve for people. And that's the thing that I think that, as what we're going through right now is, what are we doing to connect people? Because the thing that connects them is not necessarily the office. They're looking for multiple different ways that they can do that.
That's such an important um, statement, I would say, because in a sense, I see it pretty clear that there is a lot of convergence in workplace and people teams that, historically two different verticals, right?
Mhm.
But right now they're merging together in a sense, and I wonder how do you try, or at least let's say now that you understand what people are wanting in theory, right, is meet others. How do you generate these? I'm sure that open work policy is a lot to do with it, but in general, how
Mhm.
do you progress towards reaching this goal, and also how do you measure the effectiveness of your experiments? Yeah, right.
Right. Oh, that tough one. That last question is going to be a tough one. I'm going to tackle the first two.
Okay.
The thing about the things that we are doing, I think that there's two things. One, we came to the realization, and by we, I actually mean within the real estate and workplace team, particularly in a conversation that I was having with my director of programs. And that's the idea that there isn't a single team that can or should be tasked with employee experience. Like,
Mhm.
it's not a thing that is owned and then accountable to just a set of people. We're looking at, so to your point, HR, there's some elements of HR, there's some elements of, culture,
Yes.
DEI, and maybe that this is the opportunity for us to have an employee experience team of folks that aren't necessarily on the same team. And so that all of
Hmm.
those perspectives on what it means to provide the employee experience is being done holistically, and that we're coming up and using those different perspectives to then affect, what happens then of how it is that we tackle the employee
Yes.
experience. And this is
Yes.
very recent. This is probably within the past week, but I think it's got some legs. I'd really like to, what we're planning to do is like continue that, get folks into a room and say, look, we're kind of seeing this, because technically employee experience is brand new to my team. So it
Hmm.
was under a different leader up until, I want to say, December or something like that. And then that leader left and said, okay, it makes sense given all the things that we're doing for open work and return to office and all of those things, that we go ahead and we envelop this team. But then when
Yep.
they got embedded, it was kind of like, well, it feels weird that real estate and workplace number one is the like title of our team. And then
Yes.
there's this section called employee experience. Like, it's embedded underneath some umbrella as if it's just a work stream that says, oh, we do the employee experience. Okay, we came up with this and now we go do this. Because all of those aspects, ERGs, DEI, HR, culture, everything that we do has an element of employee experience. So we might as well just like come together. So I think
I
that
see.
that's the first thing that we'd like to do. Um, and then when I think about like how we're going to measure ourselves, boy, there are a couple of different that I think we're trying. But it does start with what I would call reframing some of the questions that we've got.
Hmm.
So over the pandemic, we asked questions, as probably did many companies, of how would you do X, or if we did this, like how would you accept that, or it was all theoretical. It was because we
Yep.
were existing working at home, we weren't in offices, and so we weren't going to get actual practical answers. The
Yes.
shift now, because we're actually working on a survey, the shift now has to be like, okay, this is what we know, and based on what we know, actually ask different questions that are about what's happening right now versus what do you want it to be, or what do you want in the future. Because what we've seen, again, just going back to the human behavior piece, is that people think, and again, with no sort of malintent or anything like that, it's just like people are like, yeah, I think I would go to the office 2 days a week. Well, that same person, via the data that we collect, is that they're actually maybe only in the office once a month.
Once a month. Yes.
And that's fine. Like it's not, there's no shame, there's no guilt in, when it is they get there and when
Yes.
they utilize the space. But over the pandemic, we were like, okay, we're going to use your answers to actually affect some of the things that we do. And now that we're actually in it, the things that we put into place don't necessarily match the behavior and what people are doing. So now it really has to be about utilizing the data that we currently collect rather than to foresee, but ask the questions of, so if this is what is true, why is that? Why is it that maybe you're only coming to the office once a week? When you come to the office, what do you do when you're there? Like
Amazing.
putting it in present tense questions to get out of this idea that we have to solve everything that is coming. Because I think that that's not the right perspective anymore. And I think that that's what makes us all a little bit uneasy. Is that, and again, not that we ever knew the future, because we really didn't. Like, you never know what's going to happen the next day, right?
Now you are 100% don't know. Yeah.
We fool ourselves into
Like the unexpected, definitely.
but we don't. And it's really just about taking what we have today and understanding why it's that way as a way to understand, okay, well, this is how things are sort of behaving. This is what people are doing. What are we going to do about it? How does that match or not match where it is that we see things going?
Amazing. A few things that I have as a follow-up. One, Tamar, what data are you like collecting and interested at? That's really interesting for me to understand. And in general, what are the things that I would say in a perfect world, what's the data that you would want to have to make those decisions? So that would be first question.
Okay. So I'm going to go in reverse. The ideal sort of data that would lead us to effective decisions is very rich. It is cross-functional. It is across usages. It's across a whole bunch of different things. And then taking that data, what we would do and what we're trying to do is really analyze and triangulate various things. And I'll give you an example in a minute to arrive at a sort of hypothesis. And so I'll take we've just developed a dashboard, but I'll start with our sensor technology system. So we're currently installing and have installed sensor technology in some of our key larger locations.
Offices, yeah.
What that technology does is it marries badge swipes from our physical security team with the data that the sensors collect about throughout any given day, what spaces are being utilized for what duration of time and by approximately how many people. We then marry that information with our event data that we track at each and every single location. So we understand, again, not from a private information standpoint, but we know how many unique users actually swipe into a particular office location. Then when they're there, the sensors sort of pick up and say, okay, if badge swipes show that there were 42 unique badge swipes coming into the building, of those 42, this is how they utilize the space. And we create some heat maps. So we understand that across the categorization of different space types, where it is that people are generally congregating on a day-to-day basis. And we developed a sort of measurement for that, a metric that we are calling, oh gosh, now it just escaped me. Gosh darn it. It'll come back to me. I don't remember what we're calling it.
It's okay. Yeah.
But essentially, what we're trying to do just with that one data point is if we had designed, because we did redesign several of our offices during the pandemic in advance of this, knowing that we were going to be tracking utilization. And so we would be able to then understand for any particular day that if of those 42 unique badge swipes over the course of a day, if we saw 20 of those folks in one of our hackable spaces, of which we have, I think, 7 in one of our largest locations. Hackable spaces are those that are meant for offsites. And so in a hackable space, what you will get is really brainstorming space. So
Yes.
you're able to write on walls. It's very comfy. You're able to move things around. We said that, in our sort of reimagination, anything on wheels, consider that an invitation for you to do whatever with that furniture you want to. If it's not on wheels,
Amazing.
don't move it. But that's what we mean by the sort of hackable space. But if we designed 7 of those, and over 6 months, we see that generally, number one, there's only 2 hackable spaces that folks seem to use most often, and the other ones are kind of sitting maybe 1 or 2 people, then that means we've gotten the ratio wrong. We've gotten the ratio wrong in our design, and that gives us some level of understanding of where it is that, again, people's behavior is leading them to. And when we couple that with, again, going back to, say, events, when we have events that come in, we see a huge spike in attendance on those days. What we have done around days like that is do programming with our ERGs. So that might be the same day that an ERG decides to have a function. We have chosen those days where we see the spikes as the days that we serve food. And so when we talk about sort of what it is that we do for people based on the data, we are actually evolving our programming around what we see. And generally,
Yes.
what we see in terms of like measuring the success of that is more and more people choosing certain days and having, going back to sort of how people utilize the space, other than surveys, getting in front of people. And actually having face-to-face one-on-one interviews with what we consider sort of extreme users about
Yes.
their experience when they were in the particular office. So there's so many ways that we're collecting that data, and that we're using a dashboard of several systems to aggregate everything into one place and then spitting out analysis from that one place where all this data is stored.
Amazing. I think it's super impressive. I'm wondering just on the piece for remote employees, what do
Mhm.
you do there? Because I think that's a lot of the challenges in a sense for companies that, have one aspect that is measurable, right? Like you have all of this technology, but what do you do with your distributed teams that don't have access to this space or not use it at all, I would say.
It's such a great question. And honestly, one of the first things that we decided, just based again on our sort of openware policy, technically everybody's remote. There isn't anybody who's
Mm,
classified to coming to an office. So it
nice.
becomes,
Okay.
again, less about what category you're in and more about the experience that we're delivering that you as a customer would engage you, no matter where
Nice.
it is that you
Okay.
are. Now, more directly, yes, obviously there are places that we have offices. And then there are some places where there isn't an office, but maybe there are a bunch of people. We have quite a few locations that are just like that. And
Yes.
so, what it is that we're talking about is making the differentiation between what is included in an on site experience if you are in a, as yet to be determined, commutable distance to experience that, versus if you are not able to do that, then what is your experience and how are we solving for that? Because
Hmm.
no one has to come into an office at Twilio. You don't have to come in at all. And so if that is the case, again, how do we meet you where you want to be in terms of what you want to do?
Amazing.
So one of the things that we have come up with just from a real estate and experience place, we're calling it our ecosystem of place. Within that ecosystem, there are offices, traditional sort of offices that we will continue to evolve the design of over time. But in addition to those offices, there's also other locations that people use all the time, whether it is that they are having an event and they're having it at a hotel, whether they're getting together within a group of people and they're going out to have lunch because you all happen to
Yes.
be connected. So within that ecosystem, it's us trying to figure out how is it that we can populate areas around the world that enable people to get together without, on the real estate and financial stewardship end, sort of spending tons of money in order to be able to do it. And I think that
Amazing.
there are lots of products out there now. Obviously you have co-working and stuff like that, you also got these other spaces that have been around for a really long time. And in my mind, I think of places like Liquid Space, or these on-demand sort of conference rooms, or places where people can actually come together. What I see our role is figuring out how we can get to all of those different types of spaces and launch them as available to our teams so that they can connect in person, even though they're not necessarily near an office. And it's almost like we're only paying for our actual utilization, which is not generally the way that leases and real estate work, which is part of the problem that we're in right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that we take down space 5, 10, 15 years, and we say we're going to have that space regardless of who comes into it. That's not a model that's going to work for us for the next couple of years. So what we want to do is what I just explained, and then use that as additional opportunities to collect feedback about what works and what doesn't, particularly from the aspect of it not being a location that we designed and branded. We want to understand, does that matter to people? Like, do they feel more connected in the sort of sense of place, the more attachment they feel to Twilio, or is it something else? So that's one of the things that we're doing currently, and how it is that we're thinking about it.
Amazing. Super relevant. Tamar, I'll summarize with one question, or even like your thoughts in general. I would say, what would you advise other workplace managers and directors as they navigate this new way of building teams, culture, workplace?
There's two things. I had a lot of two things today, didn't I? Most of my answers.
I love it. I love it. I also like a bullet point person, so I love it. You speak my language, so yeah.
The first thing is, don't be afraid to fail. I tell this to my team all the time. Failure is actually the way that we, I think, typically classify it, is not a negative thing. But if you do fail at something, that means you at least tried, right? And that's the thing. We are in a moment where we have to try a bunch of different things, which leads me to my second point, and that is, don't solution, ask questions. We are in a time period where the more questions we ask, the more open we are to potential different eventual solutions, even if those solutions aren't long-term. I think that we have a habit of like just trying to be like, I know the answer to this. This is the answer, and that's the way it will be. But we won't be to that level of certainty for a while, I think. And it's a bit of false hope to say, all right, I solved this, we solved this, and let's move forward. There's got to be a lot of iteration, a lot of question asking, a lot of curiosity during this time, because I do think that we are in a truly transformational reset where work is forever changed. And we, particularly as real estate and workplace, have a very huge part of that.
That's incredible and very inspiring, I must say. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. It was so fun.
It was very, very fun. And thank you really for all your candid answers and really innovative approach in my view. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And it was so great to be with you. I'm so great for everybody to be on this. I really appreciate you asking me to join.
Of course. Bye, Tamar.
Bye-bye.